I like this agenda slide better because we're talking about what modern data recovery looks like. And most of the time, when a new solution comes out in this space, it's usually a box. So you have to ask your question, what's in the box, right? What does the box bring to the table? What can a box do from a backup and recovery perspective? What can it not do as well? And are there advantages or disadvantages to that? We'll talk about how many copies of data we need, and do all those copies accomplish the same thing, or do they need to accomplish the same thing? Back to the box analogy or the box perspective, is it a software defined solution? If it's not a box, right? Does a non-box solution mean that you can truly run on any hardware or manufacturer or in a cloud anywhere you want to? Is it truly platform agnostic is really what we're trying to get at. Modern data recovery, a lot of times nowadays, looks like a service, right? Especially when your data is already in a service, whether it's in a SaaS offering or maybe you've got a colo somewhere, and who's responsible for that data, we'll discuss a little bit more. And then finally, are we even solving the same problems anymore? Clearly, some of us are still thinking that natural disaster route, but a lot more of us are really trending towards the workload ransomware, data center outage, cloud outage, that sort of thing. And then again, finally, mass recovery, and how do we accomplish that at any given point, whether we're using a box or a software-defined solution or an as-a-service offering. So lots to talk about, lots to get into, and we'll just start with the basics, a rundown of what we've always talked about and what we started from a backup recovery standpoint, from a talking point standpoint, has always been 3, 2, 1, right? Three numbers that define where our data is, what it accomplishes, and what we have them for, right? So we do have 3 copies of our data on 2 different technologies of firmware. Usually we call that a technology gap, and at least 1 copy that is offsite, offline. Now the words immutable come into play, right? So that 3, 2, 1 is what we've always experienced in the past, and it looks a little like this, right? A SAN copy, your production copy, you've got a backup copy, that's your 2 different technologies, and then maybe you've got a tertiary copy offline in the cloud somewhere, that's your secondary backup copy or your 3rd copy that creates that offsite or immutable. We also have things like 421 or 5221. We were working with a customer over the last couple of weeks that we were trying to figure out, using these numbers, how to define exactly what they're doing with their data sets. And I think we landed on a 4221. 4 copies of their data, 2 different locations, 2 different technologies, and 1 that was immutable. So a lot of ways that you can run these numbers, but really what we're talking about is creating availability of our data sets, no matter where they're at, using a backup technology somewhere. Pretty common stuff here, Anthony.
But yeah, so to your point, I mean, this is all evolved, right? You hear 3, 2, 1 is just the staple, the basics, but you hear the 4, 2, 1, and you hear, there's so many different ways to do this. 4, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 0, and really it just boils down to you need to have multiple copies. You need to have 2 different technologies, and you need at least one of those to be offsite, offline, immutable. Now, what's happening is people are used to write their offline, offsite, immutable copy to tape. And that tape went offsite to an Iron Mountain or something along those lines. But as we adjust how we are handling backups and how architecture has changed, we need to make sure that that offsite, offline, immutable is all still being met. It doesn't have to be met with the same copy. The offsite copy might not be offline, but you still need to have a way to get immutability and some of these other things in there. So it's just something to think about. Again, not all copies have to be created equal. They all can serve different purposes and have different price points.
Yeah, absolutely. And architecting that complete solution is what we're trying to do when we start to talk about data recovery. So talk a little bit about data security and really how we've always done backups in the past. And really, when we think about data security and data availability, it really is complex, right? Backups touch all portions of your data centers, wherever that data lives, no matter where it is. And your retention requirements are all over the place. Maybe you've got some data sets that have regulatory requirements that you need to meet. Maybe that data is moving between data centers. You've got multiple use cases and SLAs, and really change rate, how often we have to protect that data is also something we need to come up with a plan for. And then finally, security. Honestly, I can't think of another place outside of a network that touches every portion of your environment like backup does. Is this really something that we've always given to the junior admin as a way to cut their teeth? Is this something that we really want to do? Is it simple? Is it easy to get that to a junior person? That my thoughts is that there are a lot of opportunities to make some poor security decisions and a lot of opportunities to not understand certain criteria and miss the boat on this. So something a junior admin maybe isn't cut out to do at this point is data recovery operations. It's just been a thing in the past that we've always saddled that with that person, but honestly, we got to think about, with the complexity of our data sets at this point, is that a good idea?
No, I agree. And so to your point, typically when it's passed to a junior admin, it's like, good, it's not my problem anymore. But when somebody comes knocking for a restore, it's going to become your problem, no matter where you're at in that IT infrastructure stack, or on the team. So definitely want to make sure that backups are being completed. Not only that, I know we're talking about backups, but really this is a bigger data protection thought process and design. And that's where we didn't touch on in the last slide, but on that tier 1 SAN, we're making sure we have snapshots. That's going to be part of our recovery tier and design as well. So all of that goes together, and we want to make sure that you can recover from the appropriate tier and have multiple different recovery points and levels that you can recover from. Basically, everything becomes an insurance policy for the layer above it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna play a little game show real quick, and obviously we've showed you the answers probably on this, but if you're trying to fully protect your data, there are a lot of words that get thrown around as far as what we're trying to do, right? An immutable copy or an air gap or something that's offline. All these things get thrown around, and it's really kind of pretty interesting to see the results of the poll is pretty evenly split. And see a little less clean room, and I'm sure that that's going to go away after we start to have this conversation. But yeah, air gap, offline, worm, vault, object lock, all those things mean immutable to somebody, right? That's what the box they're trying to check, whether it's an insurance company that's making the requirement, whether it's management or the business that has this requirement. Immutability has a lot of words, a lot of synonyms, and they get thrown around a lot. And so to fully protect that data, you're looking for something in this wheelhouse, right? So you can really define this anyway. Dictionary says unchanged over time or unable to be changed is what immutable means. Not capable or susceptible of change is Merriam-Webster. I'm really easy. M means not, mutable means capable of change. It's incapable of change. So however you define it, it's going to be something different for everybody. And so we need to make sure that when we create that quote unmutable or offline air gap copy, we are meeting your needs and not the needs of Merriam-Webster or Patrick Mann to define that. We have to define it for ourselves.
Yeah, so on that note, I mean, a lot of file systems now are immutable by nature with a redirect on write snapshot technology. Data is writing in on a tier 1 SAN, on a lot of newer SANs, to new blocks, and the old blocks are not being overwritten. So technically, those file systems and that data is immutable because it's unchanged. You take a snapshot, and the only way that you're actually removing that is through a garbage collection process on the back end, because nothing is being overwritten. But is that actually what you're trying to accomplish with when you say immutable? And I would say no. What it boils down to is not just, is the data unchangeable, is it deletable? That's really what people are trying to solve for. I mean, it started out with, hey, I don't want people to, ransom my backups. So I want to make sure that the blocks that have been written are unchangeable, that they can't be tweaked or corrupted. And so, yeah, there's some of that involved, but then it really is now, could they wipe my backups so that now I'm held hostage? And so, again, so we typically, when we hear immutable, we try to help you define it and make sure we're solving for what you want. And I put a note up here. Have you ever noticed that when you ask if this is immutable, maybe there's a little pause, but you always get the answer, well, yeah, like, or depends, right? It's like they're not going to say no because that's the buzzword, and so it's all trying to figure out how to define it appropriately. And we want to make sure that you're defining it appropriately so that you don't get a bad bag of goods by somebody else that just, is a yes man.
Yeah, and quite honestly, Anthony, immutability is not a feature of any one product, of any software, of any hardware, of any storage array, of any backup product. Immutability on its face is created by architecture, right? We need not just one of these things. We don't need just API calls or just object lock, or we don't, we don't need multi-factor authentication or a clean room or something along those lines. We need a combination of it all, right? So what we do is we create an immutable architecture as opposed to using immutability as a term to identify a feature set. So what does our immutable architecture look like? Like I said, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of things like storage locks. So the ability to create a filter driver within the operating system or the file system that only allows specific assets to write to that data set, or application locks controlling who has access to that using multi-factor authentication, validating the trust of the users that have access to our data, auditing who did access that data or made changes to it. We move into things like infrastructure locks, right? We harden that infrastructure to reduce the exploits. We make sure that our storage is patched, that our operating systems are patched, that we have the latest vulnerabilities addressed, that we've created checks and balances within this architecture that allow us to take advantage of the individual feature components integrated into a complete security story. Air gap and isolation is a part of that, right? We can get that air gap any number of ways, including using API calls to access cloud-based storage or writing directly to tape. And then finally, most importantly, I think, is data validation. All these things can be all well and good. I'm a trust but verify type of person. So data validation, going in and making sure that that data is indeed unchanged and recoverable, is a piece of that immutable architecture. So really just building blocks to create the onion of security around our backups is what we're trying to do from an immutability standpoint. It's not a feature that we're looking for that we're going to check a box on, even if it is just a checkbox inside of that, that cyber insurance policy or whatever it is that's driving the immutability question. Seems to be all over the board, everywhere from that checkbox to management, and as a last ditch restore option.
And I think the application lock, so that being able to lock down who has control, who has access, what they can do, as well as validating, hey, if you're going to do something malicious, potentially malicious in the software, you're going to delete something, you're going to change retention, run data aging outside of normal schedule. These are things that don't typically happen, but they have needs and use cases. But we want to have some bells around those things so that we don't have a rogue employee that is doing something in isolation, or the disgruntled. Or we don't have somebody that has compromised credentials that is doing something before we know it. And so that's something we can set up in the software to alert on, and not just alert on, but then also require approval from another person, another 2 people, 3 people, whatever it might be, depending on how large your IT staff is. But we can set some things in place to ensure that things aren't being, messed up on the back end without your knowledge. And I think that doing things like that makes the rest of the infrastructure, where you put copies, a lot simpler. Now you're not having to pay for immutable, undeletable storage everywhere. These are those layers that we're talking about when we design in depth. These all go together to ensure that you're going to be able to recover back no matter what the attack against you is, whether it is just bad hardware or an actual full-on attack. That's the goal.
Wrong way. Yeah, so storage locks. I mean, we talked through some of this stuff, but really, it's really using those infrastructure criteria or those infrastructure features within our data sets to create protection around the storage, right? Creating those filter level drivers or using a secure Linux installation that limits access to the file system, or hyperscale storage targets that control both the operating system and the file system, limits and data movers that can be locked down, and also things like object lock and worm, right? So if we're using object-based storage, we can utilize not only that technology gap with a software solution from a backup perspective, we can also integrate that into our storage lock capabilities and create immutable copies in that manner. So lots of pieces on the storage side, but the other place that we're really seeing the bulk of the vulnerability is in the identity space, right? Protecting who you are and verifying who you are in the access that you should have. And that's not just in environments where there's a multi-tenancy, right? And you've got a shared services across multiple clients. It is about individual access and who can do what and who can verify and validate the changes being made. And always auditing that data and forwarding it so that it can be ingested into any machine learning that we have, or syslog or automation tools that we can utilize from a security perspective as well. Virtual air gap. This is something that we talk a lot about now because the appetite for tape has waned in the past. It's come back around quite a bit, honestly, as well. But a lot of people are hesitant to go back to a technology like tape, despite it being the gold standard from an immutable perspective. The availability of cloud technologies has really made it unpalatable for a lot of customers. So creating a virtual air gap is what we try to do with things like Eagle Cloud Copy, where you don't have to have any infrastructure for the storage target. We just create that copy for you and use the data locks that we have available to us, limiting your access to the backend storage, et cetera, to create a virtual air gap to that storage technology.
And then metallic recovery reserve is kind of cool too. I mean, the same with Eagle Cloud. What we're doing some things around there where we can do DR as a service into a hyperscaler just based on those cloud copies. So giving you a lower cost DR strategy if needed. So just get that copy out there, and obviously we can recover from it depending on what the disaster is.
That's a really good point. Having a copy of your data in the location that you're likely to recover from in the event of that smoking crater disaster that some of us are still looking at. Having a copy in the cloud makes a lot of sense there, and tapes don't get you there, do they? So clean room was the least picked answer in our poll about when we talk about immutable copies. And we'd actually like to change this. Really, this is one of the biggest architectural changes that we've explored in the last 10 years, I think. And that's the ability to create siloed, isolated networks, really that least privileged model to isolate the contents of our backup data or the location of our backup data, and how we create those data isolations and air gaps. You don't necessarily need a box to do this, right? We can do this all with architecture, limit the access of the data protection data stores by doing things like creating one-way firewall rules and or maybe even a DMZ location where we manage all of that stuff. But really, we've got a lot of options from a deployment standpoint, a deployment design standpoint that allow us to create more security around those data copies, regardless of where they live.
Kind of cool, and we're hearing some stuff that just came out of Commvault's latest announcement of doing this as a service even. So more to come on that.
Yeah. So Brad is asking some questions talking about the data isolation and air gaps. Would that be the cyber vault product? And the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of productized versions of this that aren't necessarily a win for anybody, especially if you're using a product that allows you to create architectural rules to prevent access to that back-end data. Orchestration, all of those sorts of things come as part of a product. But the good news is that from a data protection standpoint, Eagle as a rule has the means to do these things for you as well. Question.
And then, okay, I was going to take that one. So Stephen is asking about conversion from VMware to an EC2 instance. If the data was an S3 bucket. So we have ways of speeding that up if we want to pre-stage the data in an EC2 instance, but have the VM be offline. So we just keep it in sync based on the last known good data protection point. That's going to be your fastest recovery time. If you don't do that and you choose to go for budget-friendly or poor man's DR, we would then have to make sure that Commvault infrastructure is online, whether your whole data center is offline. We would have to bring that up in an EC2 instance, recover from a DR backup, and then start doing the recovery. At that point, you're really just limited on the throughput speeds of that and how large the VM is. So we did some testing with Azure, and I mean, it's not super fast. I think it was less than 40 megabytes per second is the throughput that we were seeing. So it's going to take some time. It's definitely not what you're used to with on-prem.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we need to talk about when we talk about this type of virtual data air gap or virtual or data isolation architecture is that we do have the ability to do things like rolling recoveries and data verification jobs outside of the production data set that allows us to get more hands-on or more handsy with that data, touch it more frequently and really figure out what's in it, and do things like obfuscate data sets that are recovery data sets that may be infected with ransomware and things like that. But you don't know that until you crack them open, see what's in there, and validate that. So data validation as part of this clean room technology is another big win. If you're going to have some assets behind a firewall just kind of sitting there, you might and consuming electricity, you might as well have them doing some sort of data verification tasks or bubble testing within that clean room to take advantage of the architecture more fully as well. So not all data lives in the data center, right? We have to protect our as-a-services, protect our ASs, whether it's PaaS, IaaS, Microsoft 365, all the places where we see that data being created outside of the data center. Endpoint is another one that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, I didn't put that on the poll, did I?
It's all good.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that anytime our data lives outside of our control, there's some sort of shared responsibility model. And I don't know that I've had backup and recovery conversation, especially around things like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce or Dynamics GP, excuse me, Dynamics 365, without showing this slide. This is Microsoft's shared responsibility model, as well as AWS is on the right-hand side. But as you can see, customer responsibility of the data is always theirs, right? They never claim that they are responsible for the integrity of your data. It's all about the availability of your data, right? So my Microsoft 365 is an availability name, right? They say that you're going to have access to your data 365 days a year, not that it's integrated at that point that you access it. So data integration and information is your responsibility.
Always really, has. That's the same with Azure PaaS or Azure IaaS. So if you're running VMs in Azure, it's still your responsibility.
Absolutely.
You can do a snapshot of the VM in Azure, but you're typically going to end up paying more for that than if you would have just done an actual data protection software. And that data protection software, that third party, gives you more control of your data because now you're getting it out of that format. You're getting a technology gap in the mix. Really, that Azure VM snapshot is just the same as having a snapshot on a tier 1 SAN. And so you have to think about it like you would your on-prem VMware environment.
Yeah, good point. A couple of people answering Salesforce on the workloads that they've considered a data protection mechanism for. And that's a really good thing to hear because quite often I ask the question, who's protecting their Salesforce implementation? And most of the time I see nobody, zero hands raised, or they're unaware of Salesforce even being in the environment. And because that is one of those business centric as a service offerings that may have never existed in the data center, central IT or IT teams seem to have it as a blind spot or something that they just don't have any availability or understanding around. But Salesforce runs a lot of people's business, and the way that Salesforce does data protection has left a lot to be desired. That's the bottom line. Things like extended retention or data segregation, or really the availability of data to be granularly recovered, or sandbox multiple environments, all of these things that we want to do in our Salesforce environment, not generally available from the baked in Salesforce data protection. Quite honestly, the Salesforce data protection isn't something that I would ever rely upon. I think the barrier to entry is 10 grand just to open up a ticket, and then there's no guarantee that data gets back. And quite honestly, when you get that data back, it's the entire data set. It's not granular options. You can only create one sandbox instance at a time. It's limited to 7 days of access, et cetera. So there are a lot of benefits associated with protecting that data outside of that native data protection capabilities, especially with Salesforce.
Really, the summary here is Salesforce or any type of SaaS offering tends to be done outside of the main IT department's guidance. Usually it's, hey, we have this, now what? And the point is it's still your data, it's still the company's data, and we really need to make sure that we're protecting it. What's nice about Salesforce is there are APIs to protect it that they've exposed. What I see a lot of people running into is this vendor, we used to get the software from them, and now they're only offering it, or they are offering a hosted version. But that hosted version, there is no way to back it up. It's an AWS instance or an Azure instance running in that company's tenant. I don't have access to it. Well, we still need to have those conversations about how to actually get the data from there. Maybe you don't have access to the underlying hypervisor, and the tenant to do like a virtual server protection. But you should have access to the operating system that is running whatever that application is, and we can put an agent on there and do backups that way to make sure that you have that data. It's portable. you have recovery points. So
Yeah.
just something to keep in mind as so many things are going to as a service models. You want to make sure that that data is protected just like it would be if it was in your data center.
Yeah. So the same thing is true with your Microsoft native controls as it relates to not only Azure and Microsoft 365, but other SaaS offerings and PaaS offerings like IaaS, or excuse me, like Dynamics GP, excuse me, Dynamics 365, and other workloads that you have in the Microsoft ecosystem. Lucas was asking about default Microsoft response on Office 365. I think this is a great time to ask that question, creating non-compliance issues around recovery and DR. Have we seen have we seen that happen specifically for our customers? We have not. Not that I'm aware of, but the fact of the matter is that what we tend to see is that the default native controls are difficult to use for things like compliance and e-discovery. And so creating some sort of rule to get that data outside of the Office 365 environment indexed and searchable from an e-discovery perspective is a lot easier to do with a third-party support. And so that's why we've really thought that these native controls are not enough, and so we've worked to protect that data using an as a service offering, similar to the way you consume the SaaS model already, right? So that data, the Microsoft 365 data is a per user license. We can protect that monthly on a per user license as well, with comprehensive coverage across the entire Office 365 suite or Microsoft 365 suite. But again, as far as a metallic Office 365 backup, the benefits of going with a hosted as a service offering, which Eagle can provide for you as part of our backup as a service, we can leverage these technologies as part of our backup as a service and provide these efficiencies. There is no infrastructure to upgrade. You don't need access nodes or host something in the cloud and pay for that infrastructure as part of your data protection. It's really easy to set up, and Eagle has a great onboarding team that allows us to protect that Microsoft 365 data really the day after you sign a quote on data protection on this stuff. Support and maintenance is always included. Even the storage from a Microsoft 365 perspective is included and contains no fees associated with access to that as we run our backups as a service offering. And then again, that's a pay-as-you-go subscription-based model, just like the way you consume Office 365. So this is our favorite.
I like to talk about this. Just what does recovered look like? I should have put a poll on this, right? Because a lot of people would say VM is online and the users aren't yelling at me, right? And I would agree with you. That's that is a form of recovery. But is that fully recovered? And I would argue no. You're not back on tier 1 storage. And really the point is you're not doing data protection. You're not going through your 321, because when it is running in production, you're taking your SAN level snapshots or something along those lines. You have recovery points there. Then you're doing backups. You got recovery points there. And you also have it off sites, and all of that stuff is happening. If you're running just on the backup infrastructure, but you're serving IO, it really is a Band-Aid, because none of that protection is happening because that workload is in the backup space. And we have a lot of vendors out there that will claim, hey, we'll mass recover you in an hour. And it's like, well, no. And then if you dig deeper, you'll find out, well, it's not going to run well, but
IO is being served box checked.
Exactly. The VM is on, and it's like, but that's not really recovered. And that was just my critical thinking angle on this slide, is just don't get tied down with that idea that, and sold on that idea that that's fully recovered. We can do that with Commvault, and I'll show you, with our. So this is a quick example.
Hey, Anthony, if you don't mind, I just want to set the stage real quick. To your point, those box offerings do tout this instant access live recovery functionality, and they treat it like they're going to recover all of your VMs, regardless of how big or how much or how many you have. And then they'll sell you a four node cluster of their box. And quite honestly, that's not architecture that supports an instant on capability of 200 plus VMs. The fact of the matter is that in order to serve that data effectively, the architecture needs to change. It needs to come out of the box and use purpose-built technologies to create the type of instant live recovery access that we're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. So this slide is just representing a typical backup environment that we would architect. So you have production storage on the left, your VMware cluster connected to a 25 gig fabric, could be 10 gig, use 25 gig. That's becoming standard, especially as people refresh architecture, refresh infrastructure. You can go ahead and hit next. The slide will build out. But what you have here is from our backend nodes on the right. So that's going to be our storage cluster. For this example, I'm using Cumulo. And we have a 4-node cluster. That's the backup repository for backups, for Commvault. And we have 2 media agents. And in this mode, this instant on, what we're doing is we actually have a read cache that is being populated on the media agents or the backup servers. So that's the SSD space that we're putting in there for this. It's going to be doing your dedupe database, your index cache, and also it's going to use a lot of that free space in an instant on scenario. So this is one way to recover. The VM is going to be reading from that read cache, and then it's going to be populating that read cache from the backup infrastructure. So what I have here is just a hybrid setup, right? Hybrid backend library. We have a lot of people that are saying, you need all flash, you need all flash, you need all flash. And it's like, do you need it? I mean, it would help. But this example, here, go back. This example will kind of show what we can do in just a 3-node cluster. So anyway, this is the idea, or a normal hybrid cluster. So this is the idea of the instant on, of what's happening when that VM is now powered on. It's going to write directly to the tier 1 storage. And then in the background, that vMotion is going to be happening from a storage perspective. And then it consolidates on the tier 1 infrastructure, and you're back up and fully recovered at that point, in my opinion. So, so go ahead, next slide. So I did a theoretical sizing for a customer. And so, 100 petabytes of VM data across 180 VMs, an all flash SAN. It had a max write throughput of only 2.1 gigabytes per second. So that's over 7 terabytes an hour that it can ingest, which is good. We had 4 backup servers, each had 10 gig NICs, and the backup storage was that scale out cluster, scale out storage that I showed on the last slide. And you could see here that the bottleneck out of these 3 items in the middle is actually the production SAN of what we can do from a max recovery scenario. This slide just shows it better in a visual format. And so you can see that we can read off this cluster at 4 gigabytes per second. So from the right going left, we're at 5 gigabytes per second on a 25 gig fabric per media agent. They're not the bottleneck, but the tier 1 SAN, top of the line, becomes the bottleneck of what it can ingest. But still, we're recovering almost 340 terabytes in a day, 14 terabytes an hour. So very good scenario. And this is a hybrid cluster that has a software limitation on the performance. It's just a license feature where we can actually make that run even faster. Right. If I put this at a 4-node all flash, all NVMe cluster like they have, we're talking about 60 to 70 terabytes an hour, up from 14. Again, great, but you're going to overrun other things. And just the point of this exercise is just thinking through. You have to think through some of these numbers, because you want to be able to know when you are fully recovered from whatever the issue is, and these numbers play into it.
Yeah. And the other point is you don't want to throw good money at bad too, right? We're not going to throw a bunch of money at all flash storage on the back end when our bottleneck is clearly somewhere else. And it just doesn't make any sense at
Exactly.
all. So, another poll question up right now while we discuss that. Really, the answer to all of this, and I think that the all of these things that we've talked about before now have been questions that we've had as part of the development of our backup as a service offering, and really just thinking through, how people operate their backups, their backup and recovery operations. They give it to the new guy or assume that the SaaS company has them covered. Uh, Neglect starts to happen. Errors, come in on your daily reports, and you look at them, you go, "Oh, that was fine. I was still working on that yesterday." And then their complacency sets in, and then your SLAs start to slip, and workloads start coming online and don't get protected automatically. Quite honestly, nobody wants to be responsible for the event that, a restore has to happen and it fails, or a workload's not protected according to the SLA that's been issued. And troubleshooting failed jobs, troubleshooting failed recoveries, maintaining the infrastructure associated with backups, all these things that have to happen as part of creating this recoverability suite. Uh, we've already thought of all of these things. And so what we do is we offer a backup as a service offering powered by Commvault and Commvault Cloud Metallic, formerly known as a way to make sure that we answer these questions for our customers. We do the architecture discovery. We outline our data protection strategies as part of the discovery piece. We architect for the solution that you need. We create the copies with immutability or with an air gap or whatever it is that you need to meet your requirements. We can help you set that up. We provide purpose-built appliance to orchestrate backups and the storage of on-prem retention for quick recovery. We can give you an S3 offsite copy as part of that solution, or you can bring your own cloud copy, right? So if you have guaranteed spend in an AWS or a GCP or Azure, and you just need to use some of that spend and you want it as a secondary or tertiary copy, maybe you're using that as your DR plan. All of that can be part of our as a service offering. And then finally, licensing. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of the recoverability licenses of a particular product. We're going to provide you an SLA, a means of recovery, and you're going to pay for what you use. And then if there are any overages, we're going to make sure that we true those things up, making sure that we right size that environment as it grows and changes. From a security standpoint, like I said, we keep this in mind for all of the solutions that we build, and that's true with our backup as a service offering. We offer a hardened installation of Linux media agents using those one-way configurations or one-way firewall configurations that we talked about before. We use multi-person authentication and multi-factor authentication. We're providing kernel level file locking. We're creating that entire architecture to ensure recoverability for you. And then quite honestly, we've got 18 years of experience supporting customers in a backup and recovery standpoint with proven SLAs in that 99 to 100% range. So we've even got a few people on here that Eagles already manages their backup. So a couple people said yes about that. They are feeling those guaranteed SLA or those proven SLAs. And the great news is that Eagle support team, we use Commvault on the back end. It's no secret. Obviously, we've said it a few times here in this environment or in this presentation. But our support team escalates directly into development for any issues that we have, not only for our backup as a service customers, but the Eagle Commvault customers that we support as well. So again,
yeah, I share the results. So a lot is mainly set it and forget it, which is nice. Our goal, though, again, if we do manage backups for you, is to get that down to close to zero as possible, where those problems become ours. that checking the reports and tweaking things, whatever it might be, that comes into play. Because honestly, you never know if there's going to be a support issue or something you're going to have to do that's going to take all of your focus. And so we know people have other things on their plate, and we don't want, to Patrick's point, we don't want this to become neglected, where now when you need it, it's not there. Restore is not there because there was an error, and I knew I should have been doing something about that. And that's one of the even not just fully managed. We do Eagle Watch, where we're trying to proactively open open tickets for you when we see alerts, so that again there's some eyes on it and it's not just a forgotten, neglected thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So like we've mentioned, recovery in depth, defense in depth, those are the things that as a core Eagle value, something that we provide for our customers with this offering, specifically around backups, but in any of the solutions that we're trying to that we design, we make sure that the design of those solutions integrate well with our current environment and deliver the outcomes that the business needs for us.